a group of dentists, we have a group of hygienists, and we have my aunt in Boston who heard that my brother was talking and she wanted to join us. So we've been doing these calls since we've been in isolation, and we've done, most of the calls we've done have either been about how, like, as dental practices, we're going to cope with COVID, or Avi's done some CE. So he did one on I'm taking over. Avi's not here. I'm taking over. Either he did one on gum grafting and one on the new classifications of periodontal disease. So we thought we're enjoying doing these calls. We're enjoying connecting with everyone, and we thought we'd do something a bit different. And if you've spent time with me, you know I do brag about my brother. He's very accomplished. And it's funny because even though he's, you think that there's some competition between us, I am proud of him and I'm happy for him. Isn't that nice?
That's very sweet.
So it's fun. My kids make fun of me.
That's not what she tells me in private, Paul.
No, I can believe it. It's not what she tells me either.
Okay.
Well, for the purpose of this call, then, if people say, "Oh, I'm studying to be a professor," I'm like, "Oh, my brother's a professor." They're like, "Oh, I've written a book." "Oh, my brother wrote a book." So I'm very proud of you, and I'm thanking you. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to Avi.
Oh, great. Thanks. Yeah, so I'm actually very excited about this talk. First of all, it's been great connecting with everyone during this isolation period. It's kind of becoming a little bit the new norm of now meeting people in this virtual world. As those of you who don't know us, I'm a periodontist in Barrhaven, and we've been, I guess, involved in just doing continuing education and reaching out to the dental community at large. And we've been hosting a lot of events in our office, and this is just something that we've kind of adapted to because of the new times. And it's still not the same as in person, but it's certainly better than completely being out of touch. So we've been doing these talks, and a lot of them have been focused on the finances of having to shut down our offices. I've been focused on some clinical aspects. And I'm actually really looking forward to this because this is completely going to be outside the box of what the norm is, or typically what we as dentists engage in as far as our CEs or the lectures that we attend. So Paul is obviously, it's my favorite brother-in-law.
Oh, that's so kind.
And
you have another brother.
What? I tell him the same thing too.
Yeah.
And it's very, very accomplished. Paul wrote several books, has been interviewed on, and I've got to see several of his interviews, including TED Talks, a couple of his TED Talks. And I just listened to actually your podcast with Sam Harris.
That was fun.
Another person I really enjoyed to listen to, and it's been absolutely fascinating to kind of hear that kind of back and forth. I guess I kind of call the two of you as kind of a think tanks, as just trying to kind of look at all this information that we have here, and trying to kind of make sense of it as far as how we as society, as individuals, are coping. What lessons do we have to learn from all of this, and so on. Maybe I'll kind of get started, and I think Alyssa and I will kind of jump in with a bunch of topics and questions. So obviously Paul is a prof of psychology at Yale, and as not a COVID expert, but as a people expert, and COVID affects people. And this pandemic affects people. what do you have to say about like how we are as society and as individuals kind of coping with this pandemic, this disaster that's going to hit us on a global scale?
Well, so that's a great question. And first, Elisa, Avi, thank you so much for having me here. This was very kind of you to invite me to this. And also thanks to both of you for setting this up. It sounds like a great service to your community, and I'm sure it's much appreciated. Like you said, I'm interested in a few, I'm a research psychologist. I'm interested in moral judgments in children and adults. I'm interested in religious belief, in political disagreement. And maybe most relevant here, I'm interested in I'm writing a book about happiness and human flourishing and pleasure and suffering and that sort of thing. I am definitely not an expert on infectious diseases or anything like that. The problem is I have so many opinions from social media that I love to share with you, but they aren't very informed. So, to answer your question, I sort of been thinking a little bit about this. I want to say three very brief things. One thing is that there's going to be no coherent answer to the question of how we're dealing with this crisis, because people are going to differ a lot depending on who they are. It's going to differ from country to country, obviously. It's going to differ on how old you are, at least in the United States, by your race, certainly by your sex. You know, for instance, men are far more likely to die from disease than women. For some of you, this could be the worst time of your life. You could lose people you love. You could lose your businesses. You could lose, horrible things. Relationships could get shattered, life projects derail. For some people, it's not affecting them much at all. And some people, I think, are viewing this as a positive life event. And so there's enormous variation. There are these studies, right, where they ask people how happy you are. And they did a study like last week where they asked 8,000 Americans, how happy are you? And on average, they were less happy than they were a year ago. But they were happier than they were in 2007 during the recession. So there's no single story to be told. Another thing is some children show a lot of anxiety due to social distancing, withdrawing from their friends, picking up the worries of their parents. But a study came out suggesting some kids are finding this a great time. For kids who are anxious in school, who are bullied, who are just unhappy with their peers, this could be a time of great respite and relief. So there's no answer to the question, no single answer to how we're responding. A second thing I want to add is that as a psychologist, I'm interested in how people are sort of thinking about this crisis, this pandemic. And what you see a lot is an overconfidence in one's views. People get really locked down to the idea that we're handling things exactly right. People are crazy if they lock down more than they're locking down, or they're crazy if they release things. Everybody got to wear masks, or masks are idiotic, or whatever. And there's all sorts of psychological mechanisms that make us go this way. There's political affiliation. If you're in the States, you're pro-Trump or you're anti-Trump, and then that might reflect how you think of this. Everywhere, there's sort of a justification bias. Many of us have been locked down for a month or more. And when somebody comes and says, maybe this wasn't as necessary as we thought, we get angry at them. And then there's a sort of hindsight bias. So, I think right now, as of today, at least where in Toronto, where I am now, people are talking a lot about masks. Masks are good. And there's a temptation to say, yeah, masks are absolutely great. If you don't use masks, you're an idiot. But, a week ago, we were saying something different about masks. The World Health Organization earlier today said, don't wear masks unless you're sick. More of a risk than a help. So maybe we'll switch again. And my point isn't to say one thing is right or one thing is wrong, but just we are drawn to extremes. Yeah. And then the third thing I want to say is a bit of humility about what I do for a living. A lot of my friends, a lot of my colleagues are out there saying, this is how it's going to change the world. It's going to make us meaner, more clutched in, or it's going to make us kinder. We're going to respect science. We're going to be people of the world. When this ends, we're going to be very physically withdrawn. When this ends, we're going to be hugging each other and shaking hands. There's going to be an explosion of sexual promiscuity and everything. There's all these predictions, and nobody knows which ones are right. I have my own predictions, but the evidence is very, very low. I think, and I'll end with this, I think the one thing we could say reasonably for sure is that people are resilient. Choose your crisis. Hurricane Katrina, the 9/11 bombings, the last pandemic over 100 years ago. It's really bad. Then people bounce back. And in about a year, people tend to be where they were. The best, safest prediction is nothing will change.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to just let that start things off.
I think that's great. I think that's a very optimistic compared to a lot of the predictions we've been hearing in some past Zoom talks that the world AC after Corona would be completely different. Everyone's talking about the new normal and so on. One of the reasons I find very interesting is that I had a lot of free time, obviously, now that our offices have been closed for 5 weeks, and I watched the entire series of World War II in color. And I was kind of reflecting back to, 5 years where Europe, an entire continent was bombed. There's displacements of massive populations, and and I'm thinking myself, everyone, we're sitting here in our fairly comfortable lives, and including myself, and thinking and very stressed out that I've been out of work for 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And all I'm asked for really to do in order to prevent a massive pandemic spread, or it's already a pandemic, but the consequences, is basically to sit down, stay at home, watch a lot of Netflix and do Zoom calls. And the stress that affects people, and there's people that down in the States that are protesting, and they are so angry on how the government dares to. And I'm just wondering, is that a kind of a reflection of a generation? Is that a reflection of maybe we've had it really good or too good for such a long time that all of a sudden that now we became anarchists essentially to a degree, with that now we've been asked to do very little compared to people in World War II, or compared to people in other parts of the world. I mean, think about Syria. They had a civil war going on for I don't know how many years, and how many people displaced, and and in a grand scheme of I can take this for a few more months, and I wouldn't trade that for whatever people are going through we're going through in Syria, or going through in other parts of the world that are still going through these wars, and never-ending wars. And it's just kind of I particularly rant about it when I look at my kids and they do something that it kind of makes me feel that maybe they're a little bit too privileged or too spoiled. What kind of generation?
Your kids are very spoiled.
Oh,
no, they're great kids. They're great kids. I know them. I could tease.
You used to be their favorite uncle.
I know, but not anymore. Not when this goes viral. This is going to really kill that. You're raising a lot of really good points about the difference between what we're experiencing now and the difference of what we experienced in the past. And one way I like to take this, because your observations, I think, are dead on, that in a sense, this is what makes this worse. So there have been people who study how people respond to disasters. You mentioned World War II. And in World War II in London, there was the Blitz, where the German Air Force dropped bombs all over the city of London continuously for about 58, 60 days. And many, many people were killed. And London was reduced to rubble. And people lived in the underground, caring for the sick and the injured. 100,000 children were sent off to the countryside. And there were studies done afterwards, and people remember that as the most exciting, best time of their lives. They remember a time where communities came together, where they loved each other, where they risked their lives for each other. They had never felt so alive. The kids were fine. Mental illness afterwards dropped. Suicides dropped. Psychiatric admissions dropped. And often in times of disaster, it brings communities together, and we are at our best. One of the terrible things about this pandemic is that, like you said, I'm not on the streets pulling bodies out of buildings. I'm not in a citizens brigade marching through with torches trying to find the wounded. No, I'm sitting at home, eating a lot of carbs, doing my sourdough starter and watching Netflix. The goodness I'm doing is I tip the delivery guy a lot. And so I don't think any of us, if I do have to make a prediction, I don't think we're going to remember this later. It was exhilarating. We all came together. No, we were forcibly pushed apart. And I think to the extent I want to be a pessimist about the effects of this, that's where I would start. I would say that the physical separation hasn't given us the benefits we normally find from these sorts of disasters.
Do you,
Well, do we know more, like, do we know anything yet about the effects of mental illness now? Like based on, like, I personally know of one case where someone needed help and they weren't able to get it and they
Yeah.
had it. So like, do we know, but then I've also heard, I have friends who are therapists whose patients were like, you know what, I don't need to meet you on Zoom. Like, I'm good. like,
Yeah.
like, I'm like, considering all that's going on in the world, like my problems aren't that bad. I'm good now. Like, do we know how most people are dealing?
I've honestly heard both. I've honestly heard people say that people who were anxious aren't anxious anymore. Maybe because the worst has happened, maybe because everyone else in the world is anxious with them and they feel connected in some sort of way. I've also heard there's a friend of mine who's a psychological postdoctoral fellow at Harvard studying people with suicidal ideation. She suggests it's going up, so that some more people are thinking about suicide than before. But no, there's no good data. It's all over the place. We'll have to know more. I mean, you put your finger on something, which is the fact that non-essential services, whatever that means, in case like people who really need help can't get help, can't be a good thing. It can't be a good thing for our bodies. It can't be a good thing for our souls. So even if this left us psychologically unharmed on average, the fact people couldn't get the help they need is a terrible thing. It'll make things worse. And that's a good point.
So I listened to your Sam Harris as well. And one thing that kind of made me feel a bit better, and I don't know if this is true across the board, but the fact that my kids have spent their like a good 10 hours a day on their devices.
Yeah.
They'll be okay.
They'll be fine. They'll be fine. You know, in a blitz, kids went feral. They left London, they lived in the woods, you know, poking animals with sticks and, you know, setting fires and whatever. And then they came back, and basically they came back and everything was fine. If there's one thing this will do, I think this whole panic about screen time and everything, kids will come back, they'll be fine. You know, it is the resilience of kids, particularly, is something which happens over and over again. And so your kids will be fine. You have very good kids, they'll survive. You, I'm not so sure, but the kids will do fine.
Another thing that kind of as a follow-up is you talked about how people behave differently during times of crisis, where they, you know, communities pull together.
Yeah.
And I mean, we've kind of seen it in mini scale here in Ottawa during when we were hit with the tornadoes a year ago or whenever that was. You know, people were walking around in the streets with chainsaws and to try and cut wood and free cars from driveways. And you kind of see it also sometimes around certain holidays like Christmas. Everyone all of a sudden is nicer.
Yeah.
And then, you know, January 1st, everything kind of goes back to normal, or Boxing Day. Do you think there's any chance, or do people carry forward certain experiences or certain feelings? Are we going to learn from this to maybe spend more time with each other, or maybe slow down life a little bit, or, you know, we're going to go back to basic, our baseline, you know, the rat race continues once everything opens up?
I want to be, you know, I said before, we can't make predictions. So I'm actually, what I should say is I don't know. But if I had to guess, I would guess we'd go back to normal. You know, these are brief moments, but our life is our life. And we don't change anything, particularly for something like this. No, I'll add something else. Here's something which you won't be surprised to hear, that friendships, close relationships, are really important for people, and they're very protective, particularly when you're older, for health reasons and so on. In fact, there's some reason to believe from cross-country comparisons that one of the many reasons that women live longer than men is because women have friends. Older women tend to have friends much more than older men do. And that's very protective for health reasons. But the one bit of news that's maybe a little bit more surprising is apparently this is no substitute. For whatever reason, FaceTime and Zoom and Skype and phone calls, if you have a close friend and you talk to them every day for an hour on FaceTime, it doesn't seem to do much. for whatever reason, the being there seems to be really important, the physical contact. And this is true. I teach, and I have a class on Zoom. I have a seminar on Zoom, and I think it's great in many ways, but it's not the same as being there.
Yeah. I think one of the things that also kind of maybe switch topic a little bit is that I find very perplexing is our level of preparedness. And maybe that kind of ties down a little bit to our ability to learn from past experiences and move forward. You know, I was, another thing that I watched and finished the whole series was that show Pandemic on Netflix.
Okay.
And that was,
you're really eating it up, aren't you?
oh man, thank God for Netflix. And what I find fascinating is that obviously that show was filmed way before this current pandemic, but you watching it, you could swear that it was just released in response to this pandemic, meaning the writing was on the wall. And our level of preparedness, you know, and I'm not just being critical of Canada or just the whole world, has been so poor. And that kind of took me back to something else that I learned in a seminar that I took a few months ago about managing your time, the difference between what's important and what's urgent, and how you decide what to do and allocate time. So things can be important but not urgent, things can be urgent but not important, and so on. And, you know, maybe that was one of those things. It's like climate change, you know, everyone knows the writing is in the wall, it's going to happen, but it'll happen someday. You know, there's probably more urgent things to deal with right now. And do you think that may have played a role into why we were so ill prepared for this pandemic? There was, you know, it's going to happen one day. A xenovirus is going to shut down the whole world economy. But, you know, one day is not really a great motivator for leaders to act.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's one of the downsides of a democracy, which is politicians who want to get elected in a free society of a democracy are very worried about the next few years. They're not worried about 10 years from now, 20 years from now, because they'll be gone then. And so long-term interests need to get satisfied in different ways. I mean, you asked about positive effects of this. One thing which I heard actually was a health expert, I'm forgetting his name, was on the Sam Harris podcast. And he was very cheerful about this, even though he said, yeah, it's possible we will lose, you know, some like 2 million Americans to this. And Sam was saying it's terrible. The guy was very calm. It turned out in the end, what the guy was saying, look, you know, this is nothing. This is just nothing. If on our worst case, its effects are relatively mild. Imagine a bird flu that kills 60% of people who get it. That could be species ending. Enough people could die that it will destabilize the world and it will be the end of us. And if it turns out that this COVID-19 motivates us, as I think it will, we're not that dumb as countries, as people, motivates us to get our act together for when the next one comes. It could be the best thing that ever happened to us. Mm-hmm. It could be the little kitchen fire that made you buy a fire extinguisher and set up an alarm. And then so next fire, instead of burning down every bit of your house, you just stop in the tracks. And we might remember this as the best blessing our species has ever had. So that's an optimistic view.
Yeah.
There's a couple of questions in the chat. One, well, Naomi started and then she clarified to me, we've been off now for, I think, over 5 weeks now. And I know myself, like, you know, that expression, I do more than 9 a.m. than most people do all day. It takes me all day to do everything that I used to do at 9 a.m. until 9 a.m. So, it's hard to be productive at this time, but eventually we're going to have to go back to work. Yeah. Like after being off for 5 weeks, how long will it take us to to get going again?
Yeah. So, you know, Naomi's capturing a common thing. I know a lot of people who are very productive people, and some people have kids in the house and can't get anything done. They're struggling, but some people don't. And then they're asking themselves, why aren't I more productive? Why aren't I getting more things? I have so much time now. And, you know, the answer is it's a global pandemic. There's a lot of anxiety and stress going around, and that slows you down. Moreover, there's uncertainty. And it just eats away at people. So, you know, one bit of advice, which is really easy to give, is people should not be hard on themselves. You know, just because you have so-and-so hours, you could be getting a lot done. Doesn't mean you will. You have to take into account what's going on with you. But I think the answer is 5 minutes. I think to the extent this ends, people go back to work, they'll be back to their normal selves in 5 minutes. That's typically what happens.
Now,
Again, there's exceptions, but it's typically what happens.
well, good. Joelle has, it's funny because about a silver lining of all of this is our planet seems to be recovering a bit.
Yeah.
So do you think we'll be more cognizant of that? I don't know if you want to, she's asking if, well, should we change the way we live? Because now we can see that we can actually, like I saw a meme that says, like, it's amazing what happens, like when you only buy the things you need. Like one of my friends isn't going to we're not going to Starbucks. So I'm no longer spending like whatever, $50 a month for coffee. Like, it's just, are we going to be able to carry that? Or is that also going to be over in 5 minutes?
Well, there's sort of two questions here. It's really interesting. It's a projection question, but a future. First thing, and again, I'm not an economist, I'm not an expert on this, but I think if we stopped going to Starbucks and restaurants and buying clothes we don't need and buying computer stuff we don't need, a lot of people will be out of work, and this recession will be far worse. So certainly, at least in Toronto, a lot of people are saying, I hope people come back to restaurants and bars and shops and everything, because there's been an enormous financial hit. And I think that's what's going to happen. I don't think people are going to find a simple life is good for them. Maybe it's almost the opposite, that once this ends, people are going to be just going a little bit crazy. But then there's a broader question you're asking, which is a good one. And it might be, there, you know, Avi said it correctly. I think there's a lot of analogies between the issues of pandemic and the issues of climate change, which is they're both things which don't have immediate effects. When you hear the news, you have to act, but when you're acting, there's no immediate crisis. And it might be that the same thing that motivates us to care more about future pandemics like this one might also motivate us to care more about climate change. And again, if that was true, that'd be another positive thing. But, you know, I've seen the pictures, and a lot of the stuff is made up, but I imagine it's true. I've seen the pictures of Los Angeles, you know, pre and post, smog, no smog. If that's true, we'll get back to the smog.
And I just kind of following up to that, again, another thing that I find kind of very interesting to observe is politicians' reaction. And I think you kind of commented a little bit about it, and that their window is usually, next election, and what can we do? And that kind of goes back to, I think, again, looking at all the decisions that were made during World War II and maybe other times in history, where it is very easy to be reactive, and it's very easy to justify your action when you react to something that's concrete, and versus being proactive. And I was thinking about Trudeau when he was shutting down the country and the airports.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, it's, on one hand, I was thinking, I wish he they closed the airports much sooner.
Yeah.
Or it hit us. But then it would have been, then everyone would have criticized him. You shut down the airport, and look at that, nothing happened. And so it's almost a lose-lose situation. And that's where it kind of becomes very difficult for politicians, I guess, to take some leadership position, because they really need almost the proof. They need the smoking gun before they make a decision.
It's true. I wouldn't want to be a politician now. I mean, I think I'm no fan of Donald Trump, but exactly what you're saying, when he tried to shut down flights from China, he got really beaten up a lot for claims he was racist. On the other hand, he was quite slow to initiate shutdowns and lockdowns, and then he got beaten up again, I think justifiably, for being so slow. So any politician right now in Canada, United States, anywhere, has a sort of dilemma, which is there's a lot of people want to open things up. They see the curve has flattened. They see other places have opened up. But if they do open things up, there will be a cost. You want nobody ever to die of COVID, keep the lockdown for another year and a half. Wait till we have a vaccine. That'll do it. But that's insane. That's insane. That would crush the economy, and any politician would end up sort of, tossed out of office. So you have to do it before you have to open up businesses and so on, knowing there's a human cost, and knowing that somebody's going to say, because of what you did, because you opened things up and you didn't wait another 6 months, people died. And any honest politician would say, yeah, that's right. That's right. That was a trade-off. But then again, if you don't open things up, people end up losing their businesses, losing their livelihoods, and they die in other ways. So, even something as minor, in the grand scheme of things, as deciding whether to open up the schools and universities in the fall, has this sort of trade-off, and these are hard choices. I'm glad I don't have to make them.
So you're not running for office anytime soon?
Yeah. I think I've said too much in my life to ever successfully run a profit. Also, my sister has so many stories, so this is never going to happen.
We can make those disappear, Paul.
Yeah,
I asked you. I'm always amazed. So I think our demographic and the people on I know based on my Facebook news feed who my friends are, we're all staying home. We're all doing what we're told. We're all staying home. My theory, I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but my theory is it's the under 20, the 15 to 20-year-olds, or that age, the 20-year-olds, and the over 70s who aren't listening.
Yeah.
And also you said men will die of this sooner. Is that because they're less robust, or is that because they're not listening?
Well, people here might know more about this, but it's a physical fact. So if a man gets COVID and a woman gets COVID of the same age, the same weight, the man is far more likely to die. And apparently it has to do with testosterone and hormones giving them a sort of vulnerability, but I don't know details. It's not just social factors. It's not guys in general tend to get into trouble more than women because we're stupider, but it's not just that. But yeah, there's different demographics. There's race differences. There's certainly income differences. There's how much you trust the government. I mean, most Americans are in favor of the lockdown. The protests, there's some weird protests that have been getting an enormous amount of coverage, but it's a tiny group of people. On the other hand, most people are thinking we're going to do something different. In part, this is because they listen to their politicians in all over the world. And in part, it's because it gets complicated, that we are going to open up, and it's just a matter of when and how.
I think another thing is kind of preparedness for the future. Do you think this, you talked about this kind of being a bit of maybe a wake-up call for the next pandemic.
Yeah, trial run.
Yeah. Do you think it's been enough of a wake-up call?
Yeah, I think it has. I think the collapse of the world economy has been the worst collapse, and I think it has genuinely frightened people, and people are going to really take a lot of care to be ready for next time.
Yeah,
I'm optimistic about that. What do you think?
I think so. I mean, on one hand, I was kind of thinking, it's the amount of preparedness has to be exponentially so high compared to our normal usage of what we normally need. Let's say, normally you need, let's say 100 ventilators to keep your hospital going.
Yeah.
But you have to prepare 10,000 ventilators in case there is a pandemic.
Yeah.
And is it possible? But then I was looking at the U.S. military.
Yeah.
What's their level of preparedness, and how much money and trillions of dollars are they spending for a war that's may never happen. And ballistic missiles and nuclear war.
Yep.
And so we certainly are capable. It's almost that I think we've always had to deal, and I don't know if it's kind of engraved in people's DNA, when something is war related, we're more prepared to deal with it because it's been around for centuries. So every country had to go through some kind of war, I guess, before its independence. So we always have a big army and prepared to fight conquerors.
Well, sorry, Abby. Sorry, is there Is there a reason? Do you think the fact that Trump calls this the invisible enemy? Like,
Yeah, I think Avi's making a really good point, and that connects to what you're asking, which is we naturally respond to enemies. 9/11 is a perfect thing to, evil people trying to kill us. We respond to all sorts of things. When it's people, it's much more of a potent, long-lasting response. And which is why the idea of keeping our military ready is a very natural thing. When it's not a person, when they're not people, it's more difficult. And then what we do naturally is we use metaphors of war. So Trump calls the virus the enemy. Smart. For a while, there used to be a war on cancer. A war on cancer? You have a war like armies war? It's a metaphor. A war on poverty. And these metaphors are useful for catalyzing people to act. I mean, here's an analogy, which is we have kinship terms for our relatives, brother, sister, mother, father. But then to get us connected with people who aren't really our relatives, we use metaphorical kin. We talk about the fatherland, the motherland, brothers in arms, and a human family. Similarly, to motivate us, we'll use metaphors, things that are associated with war and other people and enemies, and extend it to things which really aren't those sorts of things. So Trump isn't being unreasonable. I can imagine, that's nothing to do with the special facts that he's Trump. I can imagine a more rational person using the same metaphor.
Mm-hmm. One thing I kind of find interesting is that also, we're talking about how difficult situations bring people together and bring the goodness in us. And what about people exploiting bad situations? So when you see rioting and people all of a sudden break into stores and start stealing stuff, or when there is shortages of Purell, all of a sudden a bottle of Purell costs more than a good bottle of Scotch.
Yeah.
And so on. Do you think, where does that fit into human morality? Do we have some sort of? Do we all have that? Is that a certain threshold?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's what it's what I do for a living. I'm interested in sort of good and evil, and the answer is both. Yes, everything. So on the one hand, a crisis could under some circumstances establish solidarity, could bring us together. On the other hand, a crisis could also pull us apart. And now it's predicted everything possible. But we could sort of go to talk about the circumstances under which one thing will happen and versus another. And my own sense is that this current crisis has done neither, because we're not allowed to go outside.
Mm-hmm.
I can't link arms with all the people, and we go through the streets, singing the national anthem and saving, the world. Nor can I even get together mobs and to crash in and loot stores because I have to stand too close to people. It's the most interesting thing that's happened. There's been no jump in crime. There's also been no jump in good behavior because we're stuck at home. The most interesting thing people talk about is people, hoard toilet paper. Well, it makes sense to hoard toilet paper. Somebody pointed out the fact that we hoard toilet paper because we're home all the time.
Yeah.
So what makes us so different and so in some ways terrible is the social distancing, is the isolation. Lessons that we've learned from World War II and 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, the Madrid bombings don't apply here.
Mm-hmm. Do you think this social distancing to a degree may have some lasting effect? Maybe we kind of learn that, there's some certain things that maybe are probably done better with not necessarily having to meet in person, just through FaceTime or whatnot.
Yeah, this is the case for predictions all over the place. So I teach, as I said, I teach university classes on Zoom now because my school's been shut down. And I've had professors say to me, boy, this is really going to change how we do these things. This is more efficient. We're going to have much more meetings on Zoom. I've had other professors say, no one is going to freaking use Zoom ever again when you don't have to do it. It's so terrible. And you get the extremes. But I want to agree. I want to say something optimistic, which I think is true, which is some things we always could have done this way. And I think now we're going to start to do them more. So I will tell you an example that everybody here will know more about than I do. And maybe you'll tell me that I'm right or tell me that I'm wrong. But I got an email from my my doctor saying, don't, you want to talk to your doctor, don't come in. Set up an appointment and we'll talk to you by Zoom or FaceTime or whatever. And it occurred to me, that's a great idea in general. When they're doing it now because it's a crisis, but if I want to tell the doctor that I need a renewal on my prescriptions or something, or just something minor, get some advice on a minor, instead of me spending 3 hours of my day and the doctor spending, we just do it on this.
Mm-hmm.
And I can think of a lot of things in life that are easier than this, and maybe this experience will teach us a few things.
So this could be a lasting effect, basically. That maybe
that would be you're forcing me not only make predictions but to make optimistic ones. But yeah, that could be a lasting benefit of this.
We had a very pessimistic past show, so this is really a great one to balance it.
Well, there we go.
I really appreciate the optimism.
You're going through a rough time when I'm the optimist, I'll tell you.
We've been doing the Loblaws, like pick up and collect, like where you're in the car. And Abby comes home the other day and he's like, did you know they always offer this? Like,
yeah,
always doing this. I'm like, I actually like looking at my stuff before I get it. Like, I like grocery shopping. But one thing that I worry about, and I don't know if this is like the things that aren't happening because of, so like, we're not able to have a funeral. We're not able to have, like, you have a baby by yourself. Our kids aren't getting prom. Like, I worry, are there going to be, like, is there going to be long lasting resentment? Is grief going to take longer? Like,
there are people who have had very bad things happen to them in this experience. You're listing a few of them. A friend of mine this morning, his wife is pregnant. She woke up, she was not entirely well. They took her to the hospital and he couldn't go in, sitting in the car talking to her on the phone. People die without funerals. People die without anybody sitting next to them while they die, but talking over FaceTime. Absolutely horrible and tragic. And those will leave their bad effects. No doubt about it. I think again, on average, it's very complicated. Some people are having good experiences. Most people don't have experience like that. But yeah, this is causing a lot of terrible experiences. Even it's not the things like people dying that affect me so much in some way. It's the little stories, weddings canceled. A friend of mine has been waiting 4 years for a trip, saving up for it and everything, gone. Stuff like that. That's terrible.
Yeah.
There, you see, now you got me saying how bad things are.
Well, you need to balance it. So
yeah.
I just want to kind of open it up to the group.
Yeah.
If you guys have any questions for Paul or comments, or maybe you can either unmute yourselves. I'll kind of let you unmute. Okay. Press it here, and then, or if you prefer, you can just open up the chat window, and you can type it in there, and Elisa and I will moderate it to the group.
So a question that I received privately was, after, like, using 9/11 as an example, like, we talked about, like, we know that travel changed after 9/11.
Yeah.
But Paul, can you talk to that as far as, like?
Yeah, these things, I mean, I don't want to be cynical, and this takes me aside to psychology of it, but governments take advantage of these things. Once 9/11 was over, we had a security apparatus in place that I think in the end turned out to be more theater than practicality, but it's changed things forever. And there may be changes. So, like, here's a worry that some people have, which is some countries, and maybe Canada and the United States, will move to some sort of tracking. And the tracking is proven to be extremely useful in places like Singapore, really like life-saving for cutting down disease. But I could imagine, of course, a government having the power to track everybody, all of its citizens, won't give up that power when it's time. But I don't know. Here's a question I'll ask you, and I'll actually ask anybody.
Sorry, Paul, can I have everyone, unless you want to talk, can you mute yourself, because I hear background?
If you are the host, Elisa, you could go to participants, and then you could mute anybody you want.
Yeah. I'm doing it.
I've done that before. It's
Oh,
me. Don't you me. Let me ask you, when this is over, do you think people are going to move away from the handshake towards the fist bump or the bow or the namaste? What do you think?
I think it's going to take a long time before we start shaking hands again. And I think it might be the norm not to shake. Like, it's like, I feel so rude when someone offers me their hand, but the week of that week in March, when we first, like right before March break, someone offered me their hand and I was like, I'm sorry, I don't shake hands. And like, we had just talked about COVID and coronavirus, as we were talking about calling it then. We had just talked about it. And then I'm like, oh, by the way, my name's Elisa. And they're like, I'm like, don't touch me.
Yeah, I tend to kiss people on the lips, but I'm not going to do that anymore. Also, there were complaints against me, so it's a good reason not to do it. But okay, so that's a great prediction. It is possible, particularly among liberal enclaves, that the handshake will go away. This is a case where political polarity often affects these things. If a political party and their leader does things one way, people tend to go the other way. So a prediction I would make is the United States, I can't speak for how it will work in Canada, the United States might split in a way where the sort of democratic states go more for the bow or the fist bump, and the more Republican states do the full handshake, shoulder clasp. We'll see.
I think I would probably agree with Elisa. I would probably say, I think that it would probably take some sort of a news. Let's say a vaccine now becomes available.
Yeah.
And everyone would probably put their guards down. So I think it's going to be a gradual thing before people put their guards down completely.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be a matter of distance, so time, and news as far as vaccine and no more people getting infected or hospitalized, or at least not advertised.
That could be.
Because really, reality is that we shake people hands all the time during flu season.
Yeah,
we don't think twice about it.
We do. And so the world would be better. I mean, flu kills a lot of people too. The world would be better if maybe we gave up on handshaking. But we're mammals. We're very social creatures, you know? And so I think giving up on physical contact is going to be a reach. There's an appetite there.
Yeah. I think this is kind of another question I wanted to kind of maybe bring up to the group. As far as how to, going back to kind of people, I think you kind of touched on it as far as people happiness and anxiety and all that. Do you think that if you were to do another study and look back at this time, do you think you'd find any anomalies compared to other times, or it'd pretty much be the same?
It would be the same as other things, except for two dimensions. One we talked about before, which is other disasters tend to bring people together. The isolation here is unique, and that will have its toll on certain people. Loneliness, basically. This is a very nice time to be an introvert, a very bad time to be an extrovert. The other one is cleanliness and hand washing and everything. So it wouldn't surprise me, I could be wrong, but it wouldn't surprise me if more people ended up with some sort of, if you're leaning that way towards either obsessive compulsive behavior regarding washing and cleanliness, or some sort of agoraphobia where you don't really like to go outside, this might make it worse. This might lock it in.
Long-term, permanently, or just?
No, not, I mean, it could for some people, but I think it would just, it wouldn't be surprise me that if we tested the number of agoraphobics or obsessive hand washers a year from now, it'll be a higher number than it was a year ago.
I'm curious in the chat, maybe you want to answer, because when we go grocery shopping, it takes an hour for us to put everything away because we wipe everything down. And I'm like washing my hands and I'm like freaking out. And then I've spoken to, and I see Christina's nodding, so they do it at their house, but I've been talking to other friends who are like, no, and like doctors and and they're like, no, we don't wipe things down. So then we still wipe everything down, but now I'm less stressed about it. Now I'm not like asking, like, calling it Abby for putting it in the wrong place. Oh, we didn't sanitize there. But I'm curious, like, how many people are washing all their groceries, and when will I just be able to take something like gum, like when will I be able to like do the things that I'm so used to doing that I stop myself from doing now, like touching my face like out in public?
Uh,
No one's answering as far as who's washing, who's.
who knows?
I am when we come into the apartment, before doing anything, we have a bathroom by the door, wash our hands with soap. We sing happy birthday, dear COVID twice. And then we say, but besides that, we don't wash things before putting them away.
No.
No.
Do you?
I'll never go back to not doing all those things.
No.
Okay.
I think for me, I think that's going to become the new norm.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Shannon washes everything. Joelle washes everything. Karen
Yeah. And I don't see myself changing that when we go back. I don't see it being 5 minutes. I come back from a holiday and it's not a 5 minutes reintegrated into my life. It takes me a while to get back into that frenetic pace. This is going to take me a while to get back into, and I don't know, being close to people as much as I crave that connection with other people and socialization. For me, I think it's going to be very difficult to be close to people that haven't been in my household again.
Right. I know.
Okay.
We just got a comment from Denise. She actually, that's a good idea. She leaves things in the garage for 2 days.
I saw that.
Then
Wow.
then wipe it.
You can do that with visitors too.
We do that with our mail.
Mail.
Our mail.
Really? Okay, here's a question.
The envelope and like drop it and then throw
You
the.
can't do it with the groceries because usually it takes about 10 days before you're allowed to go pick it up. There's such a backlog for
Really?
pickup, and our fridge is pretty much empty, and the kids are already losing weight and can't do it.
Okay, so here's a question. If you go back through time, what you would have done was invest in Zoom, which has gone crazy.
I would have sold our stock about a month and a half ago.
All I got to say is I bought a lot of oil 6 months ago, and now I'm feeling foolish. But but if you could, how would you choose to invest right now? There's if some of you don't know, there's Tinder, which is a dating site typically for sexual hookups. Would you predict that when this is over, it's going to go crazy with all this pent up people, lonely people, or like a lot of people say, if you put your groceries in the garage for 2 days, you're not going to want to hook up with a stranger. Do you think that there's going to be more of a social sexual thing or less when this is over?
I think that the demographic that's using Tinder,
Yes, those people.
I think they're probably risk takers.
Yes, good.
So I would think that demographic would probably be like, it would just be, they're probably still using it.
Yeah.
And if they're not, then like Nick's smiling. Yeah, so I think I think Tinder will be a-okay.
So you don't want to bet against love, you're saying?
Or whatever you call it.
Whatever you're talking about.
Well, I would, and maybe guys, you want to write it down, but I would invest in the full body condom. I think it's definitely, that's coming.
There we go.
Yeah. Do you notice, Paul, differences as far as cultural response between Canada and the US as far as just people? Not necessarily the governments. Obviously, there's a lot of differences between Trump and Justin, but I mean, are people in the US tend to be more, the capitalism, I'll make my own decisions. I'll decide if I want to take a risk. Don't tell me to stay home, or versus Canadians, we in Canada, we like standing in line.
You might expect that there's obviously been political differences. My sense is that even people who are critical of Justin Trudeau, or for instance, the more local governments, think things are being basically done pretty reasonably well in Canada, while there's very divergent opinions in the States about Trump, as you'd expect. And I'm not in a position to do a sample because I've been sitting this whole thing out in Toronto, but I talked to a lot of people in the States and a lot of people in Canada, and I know a lot of what's happening in Toronto and a lot of what's happening in New Haven, Connecticut, which is a big size city where I'm based. I don't see much of a difference.
Mhm.
Do you think that there's a difference? The politics is crazy different, but I don't see much of a difference in individuals. Everybody seems to be pretty into lockdown. There has not been a single movement anywhere in the States saying, screw this, we're not going to do it. There's been groups of people who disobey the rules, but that's true in Toronto and Montreal as much as it's true in Los Angeles and New York.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to tell because I mean, obviously, I don't know what's going on in the different cities in the States, and there's obviously you got the red states and you got the blue states,
Yeah.
and there's the political biases. I think there's probably it's much more polarized society compared to Canadians. I think we're pretty much,
Yeah.
you know, central and a little bit to the right, or a little bit to the left. You know,
Yeah.
law-abiding citizens,
Yeah.
boring. You know, follow rules.
But it's not like America's been that different. It's not like, oh, have you heard of the state of Texas? They've ignored everything. It's not that.
Yeah.
Most people just businesses are shut down everywhere.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
a great question from Denise that I think you're going to love.
Okay.
How will people feel about Trump leadership after this?
Well, one thing we know for sure is that this will finish him, and he will be hated for his failure to act. He'll be held responsible for all those people who died. The other thing we know for sure, of course, is that every president gets a huge boost in a crisis. Trump's endless being on TV, his narratives, they're going to make him the next president for sure. So you can make the predictions either way. The truth is, on average, it seems to balance out. The same number of people who thought he was fantastic think he's fantastic now. Some really hate him. Hate him now.
So you don't think there's like, I think Trudeau is as a world leader compared to other world leaders, I think he's doing a very good job and communicating well. So, but do you think people who liked Trump before like him now and who didn't like him, or do you think there's been changes?
I think Trump is such a special circumstance, which is very few Americans, according to polls, are ambivalent about Trump. You either think he's you know, a narcissistic idiot monster, or you think he's Christ been born again on earth, and there's nothing in between. So people's views aren't there's not that much room for people's views to shake.
And Denise follows up, do you think it'll be different if he gets COVID?
That's interesting. So I will make the bold political prediction that if he gets COVID and dies, that will be different. But I don't know. Maybe he'd get sympathy, and I don't know. Denise, what do you think would happen if he got COVID? How would the prediction go?
Not sure if she's typing, Denise, or you want to
Unmute yourself.
So I just.
Okay.
Well, anyway, and I don't know. It's a good question.
no answer?
I mean, U.S. presidential elections are always coin tosses. They're always, the last 6 of them have been like 50-50. And it's like a coin toss. Is it going to be rainy on election day? Whatever.
Oh, I think we got a response.
Maybe he would change his action if it's him and his children. Well, I don't think he likes his children that much. I don't know. I mean, right now, I don't know. He recently, just to be Trump, one of the governors opened up their state for business, and Trump yelled at him on national TV for going too quickly and not caring too much about the people. No.
It's hard to know his motivations. Is it scientifically based motivation, or maybe it looks good on TV if he happens to yell at someone for opening up to?
So this, I mean, this comes down to, this is entirely aside my quality. And my assumption about Trump is that I think his main motivation is to get reelected.
Yeah.
And if saving people's lives is a way to get reelected, he'll save people's lives.
Do you think it's unique for Trump, or is it pretty much what drives every politician to get reelected at the end of the day? I mean, maybe some of them are maybe bold about it and some are more delicate about it.
I think
that's what they do.
It's absolutely true. But one of the either worst things about Trump or the best things about Trump is that in my view, that's all he cares about. He has no consistent political philosophy. some people think he's a fascist, and there's all sorts of fascist tendencies in Trump. But basically, Trump would go full communist if it thought it'd get him an extra 10 votes. He doesn't care. While other politicians typically have something going on. Trudeau, I think, has basically liberal leanings. He has even honestly liberal views about, and of course he wants to get reelected. Netanyahu, Merkel, they often have views, and they also want to get reelected. But often Obama would do an unpopular thing because it fit with his sense of what the right thing would be to do.
Yeah, I think I was going to comment from he doesn't believe in science. So
no,
you're right. Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He believes in Trump.
He believes in Trump.
I mean, for a while, anyway, let's get away from the politics.
Let's get away from Trump. Yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating that everything, doesn't matter what happens in the world, somehow Trump gets into the conversation.
It's always, you just wait 5 minutes and then people are talking about Trump.
Yeah, whether it is justified or not, but is such a unique character in the political scene that I think people always.
So you have Trudeau, who is, I think, find this an era where he's doing quite well. What about Ford? How is he doing?
I think he's doing very well. I mean, he's getting a lot.
I get, right?
And I think what's interesting is that it doesn't matter. Obviously, you have a conservative premier and you have a very liberal, couldn't be more different than Ford.
Yep.
Yet they're both getting a lot of approvals from both sides of the aisle, and I think it seems that at this time of crisis, really, people, at least here in Canada, from what I gather, at least, they seem to put their political view aside, and really they want to see action.
Yeah.
And they're both seeing action from these two leaders in a positive, constructive way.
And you said earlier, which is true, that kind of it's very difficult for politicians. Whatever they do, they could mess up. They'll get blamed for it. But also, being a politician in a crisis and not screwing it up could be tremendously valuable to you in terms of popularity. George Bush after September 11th, Rudy Giuliani after September 11th. Americans always get a wartime boost of support and everything. So, if the election was held tomorrow, Trump would probably win, and I imagine Trudeau would win, and Ford, just because they're in the middle of a crisis and they're not obviously messing it up.
Too badly. And I wonder what does it say about us as humans, that just we almost we kind of gravitate towards looking for leadership. It's almost like we're some sort of a pack animal, and it doesn't matter who the leader is, left, right. But if we're in trouble and there is a leader, we're happy.
You could explain a lot of, not everything, but a lot of what goes on to people, but reminding yourself that we're great apes, we're primates, we're mammals. And so, and for instance, this is why I don't think we're going to give up on physical contact. It's why I think it's wise to put money into Tinder. I think there are certain things that aren't going to shut down.
So we're all going to gravitate to baseline.
Sorry, I think it's like they say, like saying a leader, we gravitate towards the leader in times of trouble. But I think they say that like in sales, or if you turn somebody around, if it's a bad situation and you make it better, it's better than just being good to start with.
Yeah.
So I think it's like we like fixers.
Yes. Bill Clinton, at the end of his 8 years, said as one of his biggest regrets, this came out in an interview, he never really got a good war. He never got something where he could like save the day. All he had was a good economy and stuff like that. But you need, this is an opportunity, and the predictions are impossible to make, but as a baseline, it causes a boost in your popularity. That's like a law. And the fact that Trump hasn't got more of a boost, I think, just says something about Trump's special situation, that people are already so polarized.
So just to kind of start wrapping up a little bit, Paul, if you had to kind of give us a bit of advice, so I guess management, how to kind of keep our sanity now. So what would be your number one advice? And then maybe follow up to that is, when things kind of go back to normal, how to transition back into normal from this kind of extended vacation, unwanted vacation.
Yeah. So I've been looking at, I have friends who give this sort of advice for a living, and a lot of the advice is like stupid, like eat well and exercise and everything. But there's some it's just common sense advice. There's two bits of advice I've heard that to me make sense that maybe people don't think about enough. One is try to spend some time outside. The advantages of being outside for mental health, for physical health, for everything are very powerful. And people say that even if it comes to some mildly increased risk of infection, the odds of getting sick from somebody outside are probably extremely low and more balanced by the benefits of being outside, the health benefits, the immune system benefits. Then the second thing, which connects a little bit more to what I'm thinking about my recent book and everything, is routine is good. So I think a lot of people already have routines that this time to do this. But living a life where you just flow from one thing to another and you don't have sort of structure, I don't think is so good for us. And then for the future, I would actually go back to a lot of what you were saying, Avi, which is some of what we're doing now is smart. Is our circumstances have led us to discover things about ourselves, useful things like, use of video conferencing in the right way, maybe less consumption of a certain sort. And I think we should just try to remember it as we go on. Try not to lose the benefits we accrued.
Yeah.
So before we say goodbye, so your last book was Against Empathy.
Yep.
So I remember we had you over with some friends and you'd be like, hi, I'm writing a book about empathy. I'm against it.
Yeah, that's always good.
So what's your new book about?
It's tentatively called, but my editor's not approved, Sweet Spot, Suffering, Pleasure, and the Good Life. And it's about why we often choose to suffer. Either experience a pain, like low-level pain, like spicy foods and hot baths and BDSM and stuff like that, but also why we choose to do things in life that are difficult, like long-term projects or having children, going to war. And it argues that a full life contains both pleasure, but also suffering and difficulty.
And it is by choice.
By choice, yes. Pardon me, Lisa?
Would this be suffering?
It would be suffering, but unfortunately, it's not suffering by choice. And one thing I argue is that suffering that you didn't choose kind of just sucks. A lot of people like to think it makes you better, but the evidence for that is not so strong. Chosen suffering is the best, but unchosen suffering, you just got to try to make it through. Mm-hmm. And now we're back to me being pessimistic.
All right. Well, I look forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
I don't know who you're dedicating it to, but
I'm not going to dedicate you another book, Elisa. That's a bit too much.
Piper never had a book dedicated to him. I'm just saying.
Your dog. Well, if there's a betting pool on the dog, I would not put too much money on the dog.
There? Okay.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Paul.
you for having me here.
It's been great.
Bye, Elaine. Good to see you.